Welcome back to Crimson Tide today with Zack Aitken. We're in the heart of fall camp, and that means every practice report, coach's comment, and news coming out of Tuscaloosa, it's going to start carrying a little bit more weight. There's a lot happening around the program right now, and we've got plenty to dive into as we continue counting down the opening days until kickoff. Before we get started, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and join the conversation in the comments below. Now, let's kick off the opening drive. So today's show, it's going to sound a little bit like a medical Monday. Alabama got some unfortunate news coming out of its first scrimmage in fall camp, and it involves a player who looked like he was positioning himself to have a pretty big role in this offense. Running back A.K. Deer, he suffered an ankle injury during the first scrimmage last Thursday, and according to multiple reports, Deer is expected to miss roughly 6 weeks. And the timing of this it's really crazy when you think about what happened to Alabama just a year ago. If y'all remember last August, Jam Miller, he suffered a dislocated collarbone during a fall camp scrimmage, and he ended up missing the first 3 games before returning against Georgia back in late September. Now, pretty much 1 year later, Alabama loses another important running back during a fall camp scrimmage. Obviously, you never want to see an injury, but the good news here is that it doesn't appear to be something that's going to cost Deer his entire season. If that 6-week timeline holds, we're talking about Alabama being without him primarily during the early portion of the schedule, and in a perfect world, Deer, he would make his return against South Carolina on September 26th. And that's important because I really thought Deer was going to have a significant role with this offense this season. Daniel Hill, he's still the guy I expect to lead this backfield, and nothing about this injury, it changes that for me. Hill, he gives Alabama a bigger physical back who can run between the tackles, and I think he's going to have every opportunity to establish himself as the #1 running back. But I never viewed I never viewed Hill as this guy getting 25 carries every single Saturday. Alabama, they're probably going to want to have multiple guys involved in the rotation. And A.K. Deer, he was probably going to be one of the biggest pieces of that rotation. He gives Alabama a little bit of a different element with his explosiveness, and apparently he was having a really good scrimmage before his injury. Kalen DeBoer said that Deer had already scored a touchdown, and he was having a nice day with his touches that he received. So now the question is going to be, who's going to take those carries while Deer is out? I think the first name that I'm going to be looking at is Kevin Riley. Riley, he's been in the program and he's had time to develop, and now there's a legitimate opportunity sitting right in front of him. We're not talking about waiting for next year with Kevin Riley anymore. Alabama's going to need another running back behind Daniel Hill, and especially during those first few games. And Riley, he has the chance over the remainder of fall camp to prove he's the one that deserves those touches. Another guy I'm going to be watching is freshman Trayshawn Brown. Brown, he's generated some positive buzz during fall camp, and offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, he's specifically mentioned that some of that burst that Trayshawn Brown's been able to show while he's been able to be on the practice field. And sometimes opportunities for young players, they do come earlier than expected. And this could be one of those situations for Trayshawn Brown. But then, obviously, there's also E.J. Crowell. And Crowell, he's a little bit of a wild card in all of this. We're talking about a 5-star freshman with a ton of talent. With Deer's sideline, there's certainly a path for Crowell to have a bigger role early in the season than maybe we originally expected. But there is one problem. He's got to get healthy first. Crowell, he didn't participate in Alabama's first scrimmage because he's been a little dinged up himself. But the encouraging part is that DeBoer says he expects Crowell to only miss a couple practices and doesn't expect him to miss any game time. But still, this is a freshman running back who missed valuable time back in the spring, and now he's missing more valuable reps during fall camp. So I don't think Alabama can automatically assume that E.J. Crowell is just going to come in week 1 and immediately take all of Deer's touches. He's going to have to earn that. And I think that's why the next couple of weeks, it's going to become really interesting for this running back room. Daniel Hill, I think, is still your lead guy, but who's going to be behind him? Kevin Riley and Trayshawn Brown have opportunities, and E.J. Crowell will have an opportunity once he's able to get back onto the field. And they're going to have to take advantage of it. Because one thing we've talked about all offseason is how important the running game is going to be for Alabama in 2026. That's not going to change just because A.K. Deer went down. If anything, it's going to put more pressure on the rest of this room to step up. Hopefully, Deere's recovery goes smoothly and Alabama's able to get him back around that 6-week timetable. But until then, someone else is going to have to get those carries, and right now we got to figure out who's going to be taking them. Continuing with our injury updates, let's change over to the defensive side of the ball. Freshman corner Jordan Edmonds, he's expected to miss at least a few weeks with a lower body injury that he suffered during a practice last week, and the injury occurred during a practice. It was not during the scrimmage last Thursday, but again, you never want to lose anybody during a fall camp. But when I look at this injury, I think it's a double-sided coin, and I think there's, multiple ways to look at it. Obviously, the bad news is Edmonds, he was starting to look like a freshman who could contribute immediately to the team. But the good news is Alabama might be better equipped to handle this injury at corner than just about anywhere else on the roster because this secondary is very deep. Let's start with Edmonds. This wasn't just another freshman coming into the program. Edmonds, he was a 5-star prospect out of Sprayberry High School in Georgia, and he was ranked the number 3 corner and the number 20 overall player in the 2026 class by 24/7 Sports. He committed to Alabama in March of 2025, and Georgia was continuing to push for him, but Edmonds, he never wavered from his commitment to the Crimson Tide. Once he arrived in Tuscaloosa as an early enrollee, it didn't take long for him to start turning some heads in practice. Kane Womack, he talked during the spring about how the maturity that Edmonds has shown as a freshman and basically put him in the same category as some of Alabama's recent defensive backs who were able to contribute early in their career. I mean, guys like Zabian Brown, Dejon Lee, and Ivan Taylor. Womack, he also believed Edmonds was on that same trajectory. And that's why this injury is a little disappointing because I don't think Edmonds was necessarily ready to start and have an impact early into the season as a starting corner. Obviously, Alabama has Zabian Brown and Dejon Lee at corner already. And that's one of the better starting corner combinations in all of college football. But Edmonds, he could provide another long athletic option behind those guys. And apparently, he was making a push for some playing time. During Alabama's practices last week, Edmonds, he was already seeing spotted getting some work beside Red Morgan as well at Husky. So Alabama was clearly experimenting with trying to get him onto the field and, put him in different positions to see how he would respond. But now somebody else is going to have to take those opportunities. And Carmelo O'Neal, that's one name I'm going to be watching. Alabama brought in O'Neal from Mercer through the transfer portal, and at 6'4", he gives the secondary another really long advantage at corner. But you also have Chuck McDonald, Zion Gibson, and several other options that Alabama can work with behind the starters. That's where the depth of this secondary is going to become so valuable. If this happened at another position on Alabama's roster, we might be having a very different conversation. But at corner, Alabama can definitely survive it. But here's one part I don't want to overlook. Alabama, they've been very vocal that they want to play more aggressively on the back end of the secondary this season. We've heard Kane Womack talk potentially about using more press man coverage and allowing these corners to challenge receivers. So when you play that style of defense, you want as many capable defensive backs as possible. And Edmonds, he absolutely looked like somebody who was eventually going to be part of that rotation. The encouraging part is that the expectation right now is that he's going to miss weeks. He's not going to miss the entire season. So hopefully Alabama can get him back healthy, get him back into practice, and continue that development. Because I still believe Jordan Edmonds can help this football team some way in 2026. His role may be a little delayed right now, but this is a former 5-star corner with great length, athleticism, and obviously a ton of upside. And if Alabama can get him back healthy early in the season, don't be surprised if number 16 eventually works his way into the secondary rotation. But for now, it's just another opportunity for Alabama to prove just how deep this defensive back room really is. So let's switch over to start talking some ball. Alabama officially completed its first scrimmage of fall camp last Thursday, and while we obviously didn't get to watch it, we were certainly able to get some information about what happened inside of Bryant-Denny Stadium. And I think the biggest takeaway is pretty simple. There's still a lot to figure out about this Alabama football team. The scrimmage, it lasted more than 100 plays, so Kalen DeBoer and his staff got a pretty extensive look at this roster in a game-like environment. And obviously, everybody wants to know about the quarterbacks. Austin Mack and Keelan Russell, they're still battling for that starting job. And from everything we're hearing, I don't think Alabama's ready to make a decision just yet. Both Mack and Russell started off slow with some interceptions, but they were able to get into a rhythm as the scrimmage played out. But Russell, he apparently had a good day, and of course, it was his legs that really stood out. There's been some positive buzz coming out of the scrimmage about Keelan, and that's significant because that is where you want to see him take that next step, because we already know that the talent is there. The question is whether he can consistently command this offense, make good decisions, and avoid the mistakes that young quarterbacks sometimes make. Mac, he obviously he still has the experience advantage. He knows his offense backwards and forwards, and he has a strong relationship with Kalen DeBoer and as well the offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb. But Russell, he has that natural playmaking ability that is going to make this competition really interesting. And I think this battle still has some time left before Alabama names a starter. The other thing I'm going to be watching very closely is the running game, because regardless of whoever wins this quarterback job, Alabama has to be able to run better in 2026. Daniel Hill, he continues to look like that guy that Alabama can lean on at running back. And despite some injuries in that room, the early indication is that Alabama was able to have some success running the football against what should be a pretty good defensive front for Alabama. And that might be one of the more encouraging things to come out of this scrimmage, because we've talked all offseason about this offensive line. Alabama's replacing multiple starters up front, so there's still competitions happening across the entire offensive line at different spots. So I don't necessarily care about hearing that the offense had a bunch of explosive plays in the scrimmage. I want to hear that Alabama was able to line up, move people, and run the freaking football, because that was a major problem last year. And if Alabama's offensive line can become a strength or just a dependable unit, it changes what the ceiling of this offense can be. Defensively, I continue to feel really good about this group. One name that keeps popping up in these conversations is linebacker Luke Metz. And we've talked about Metz recently, and he's becoming a legitimate factor at inside linebacker. DeBoer, he praised the way Metz is continuing to improve, and when you combine that with what Kane Womack said about him earlier in camp, I think we're past the point where this is just a random fall camp storyline. Metz, he's putting himself in position to play meaningful snaps this season. And that's what these scrimmages are really about. I mean, we're going to focus on the quarterback battle because obviously that's the biggest storyline, but Alabama's coaching staff, they're still trying to figure out a lot more than just QB1. They're trying to figure out the best 5 offensive linemen. They're trying to figure out the rotations at running back and wide receiver. And they're trying to figure out the pecking order at linebacker and figure out which younger players can actually be trusted when the season starts. So I don't think we should overreact to anything coming out of the first scrimmage, but I do think there are some encouraging signs. Keelan Russell, he appears to be pushing Austin Mack really hard for this quarterback job. The running game, it's starting to show some life, and the defense, it continues to look deep. And we're starting to see some player names like Luke Metz emerge as legitimate contributors this year. Now, Alabama, they're going to have the chance to go back, watch the film, and correct the mistakes and do it all over again. And I think the next scrimmage, it's going to become even more important because we're getting closer and closer to the point where these position battles, they're going to have to start becoming decisions. So it's time to introduce a new segment here on Crimson Tide today. With the NFL preseason officially underway, I want to start keeping up with former Alabama players in the NFL, and we'll call it Bama in the NFL. And after the first week of the preseason action, there were already several former Crimson Tide players that were making some noise. But we've got to start with Ty Simpson. Simpson, he made his NFL preseason debut for the LA Rams, and if you're an Alabama fan, it was just as good of a start as you could have hoped for. Simpson finished with 190 yards and 2 touchdowns, and he helped the Rams come back and beat Kansas City 20-12. And both touchdown passes came into the fourth quarter, and that's what stood out to me. We already knew Simpson had the arm talent coming out of Alabama, and we saw his mobility, and we saw the grit and the toughness that he had as well. But in his first NFL preseason game, he looked comfortable running the offense and made plays when the Rams needed him. Obviously, it is preseason. Nobody is making huge predictions based off one game. I mean, Matthew Stafford is still clearly the guy in LA for now. But for a rookie quarterback to come in with his first appearance in an NFL uniform, this was a very encouraging start to his career. And Simpson, he wasn't the only member of Alabama's 2025 offense who had a nice debut. Jeremy Bernard, he looked really good for the Pittsburgh Steelers. Bernard, he had 4 receptions for 51 yards in Pittsburgh's 28-9 win over Green Bay. And if you watch Bernard at Alabama, you probably weren't surprised by how he did it. He was making plays after the catch, and that was one of those things that made Bernard so valuable at Alabama. he could get the football into his hands underneath and turn a relatively simple completion into a much bigger play. Now, he's already generating some buzz in Pittsburgh as a potential option at that third receiver spot in the rotation. So keep an eye on Jeremy Bernard through the rest of the preseason. Another former Alabama skill player who helped himself was Jam Miller. Miller, he was a 7th-round pick by New England, which means every preseason opportunity, it's going to matter a lot for him. He took advantage of his very first one. He had 14 carries for 55 yards, and he led the Patriots in rushing against Indianapolis. His longest run, it went for 15 yards, but more importantly, Jam Miller, he looked more like that same physical runner that Alabama fans watched in Tuscaloosa. He ran hard, he wasn't afraid of contact, and with New England still trying to figure out its depth at the running back room, Miller, he gives himself an opportunity to earn that third running back job. And for a 7th-round pick, that's exactly what you want to see in his development. Then we also have Caden Proctor down in Miami. Now, offensive linemen aren't going to, put out the stats that jump off the screen, but Proctor, he only needed one series to give Dolphin fans a glimpse of why Miami took him 12th overall in the NFL draft. Proctor, he helped Miami move the football on its opening possession against Washington, and the Dolphins eventually scored a touchdown running behind him. He also showed a glimpse of that athleticism, getting out in space and being a puller. And at around 350 pounds, being able to move the way Proctor does, it's what made him such an intriguing NFL prospect in the first place. It was a short debut, but it was a very good debut. And finally, let's stay with the big guys and talk about Tim Keenan III. Keenan, he joined Ty Simpson with the Rams after being selected in the 7th round. And he was very active on defense against Kansas City. He had 5 total tackles, including 4 solo and a sack. And that's the exact type of performance you want from a late-round defensive lineman fighting for a spot on that rotation. Keenan, he was never necessarily the flashiest player during his time in Tuscaloosa, but he was big, physical, dependable, and willing to do the dirty work inside. And those are traits that can keep you around for a very long time in the NFL. And as we know in the NFL, it stands for not for long. So overall, I would say week 1 of the preseason was a pretty successful one for the Crimson Tide. Ty Simpson threw for a couple touchdowns. Jeremy Bernard, he continues to push for a bigger role in Pittsburgh's receiver room. And Jam Miller led the Patriots in rushing. Caden Proctor, he looked the part in his NFL action. And Tim Keenan, he's making his presence felt on the LA Rams defensive line. That's exactly what I want to see from the start of this segment. Because just because these guys leave Tuscaloosa doesn't mean we're just going to stop keeping up with them. So throughout the NFL season, we'll continue checking in on our guys and highlighting the players who made an impact at the next level. So that was your first edition of Bama in the NFL, and hopefully we've got plenty former Alabama players that we can talk about as the preseason continues. So guys, that's going to do it for today's episode of Crimson Tide Today. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any Alabama football throughout the season. We've got plenty more coming as we get closer to kickoff, so make sure you guys are here for it. Thank you all for watching Crimson Tide Today, and until next time, roll Tide.